to our YouTube channel as we continue on glycolysis. Now, we had earlier established that glycolysis has 3 stages: preparatory stage, the splitting stage, and the oxidative stage. Now, we established that this process, glycolysis, is actually a process whereby glucose is being split to give pyruvate. The essence is for energy production. Now, during the preparatory phase, the body is investing, so I'm using up ATP to start up my process. During the splitting stage, of course, here the ATP is used to phosphorylate the glucose. We mentioned that the step 1 we phosphorylated at one end. Now you isomerize, phosphorylate again, and then we now split in the second stage. Then we go to the third stage, which is oxidative stage. Okay, let's start again. Welcome back to our YouTube channel. We're going to be continuing on glycolysis. Now, we earlier established that there are 3 stages in glycolysis: preparatory stage, splitting stage, and oxidative stage. Now, in preparatory stage, like we established, when we look at the preparatory stage, what's the key thing we see here? ATP is being used. Now, the essence of glycolysis is for energy production. Now, when the body wants to produce energy, but at first, it spends energy in this phase step, knowing fully well it will recover. So we look at like a man that is investing. So here he's investing ATP, and that's phosphorylation. Then there's a split, aldolase A, and we came into oxidative phase. Now, the particular guy that is coming to oxidative phase is called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. So today we'll be dwelling on oxidative phase. Now, in the oxidative phase, we have different steps in the oxidative phase or oxidative stage. There are different steps here. Now, the first step, which is our step 6 of glycolysis, is the conversion of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate to 1,3-diphosphoglycerate. So you can see very carefully. Remember, we said during splitting we have DHAP being formed and then we have G3P being formed. Now, out of those 2, I said the one that will come into step 6 is only G3P. That's why DHAP is converted to give you G3P. So now from here, please take notes. As we start oxidative phase, everything we are learning will be for 2 persons. So it was as if I had glucose before. The glucose changed to different things, but ultimately it splits. And they split, I had G3P, and then I had DHAP. Following these splits, this is what I want you to see. This is converted to this, such that after I go down, what I'm having is, I'm having a G3P going down to enter step 6. At the same time, this one is changing to G3P. And then, so I'm having 2 of G3P, doing anything I'm saying, going down. So this step here is conversion of this G3P to 1,3-diphosphoglycerate. What do I see here? The first thing is that there is only 1 phosphate in the first compound. But right here, I have 2 phosphates. So that means there is phosphorylation. Now, another thing is that I had an aldehyde here, glyceraldehyde. But when you go here, you see glycerate. Glycerate is an acid. Okay, the salt of an acid that's lost hydrogen ion. So when you look at it, the only difference between this one and this one is number 1, addition of a phosphate, and number 2, oxidation of aldehyde to give carboxylic acid. So carefully, this is what we have, that glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is changed to 1,3-diphosphoglycerate. Now remember very carefully that the only steps that we irreversible was step 1, 3, and 10. This is step 6, so that means it should be reversible. Now, what else is important to know? Where is my source of phosphate? Please take note. The source of phosphate here is not from ATP. Everything about phosphate from ATP was only in preparatory. When we come to oxidative, we are trying to regenerate energy. We are trying to add energy to the system. So in this case, what we do is that phosphate is inorganic phosphate. So the body just picks up phosphate from the surrounding and then adds in. So that's the source of the phosphate here. But then also, because of oxidation, during every oxidation, We are told oxidation is either addition of oxygen or removal of hydrogen. Oxidation is either addition of oxygen or removal of hydrogen. So when I look at this case, it is removal of hydrogen. So when I remove hydrogen from here, I add it to the coenzymes and I have this. So these people here, so this is my substrate. The enzyme acts on the substrate, removes hydrogen from it, but where does it dump the hydrogen? On the coenzyme, which are usually vitamin B derivatives. So the enzyme for this step is called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase. So you look at it very carefully. In step 6, very simple, very straight to the point, I'm converting G3P, remember there are 2 of them, to 1,3-diphosphoglycerates. Now, one of the things I'm noting about this step, from 3P, that was just 1 phosphate. I'm having 2 of them here. So there's addition of phosphates. But right here, it is not a kinase acting. So the phosphate is not from ATP. Rather, it's an inorganic phosphate picked up. Now, aside from that, there's oxidation. But this oxidation is by dehydrogenation. So I'm actually removing hydrogen from this compound. So when I remove hydrogen from glyceraldehyde, I give him to NAD. The NAD becomes NADH. And then my compound changes from glyceraldehyde to glycerates. So that's all about step 6. So what do we observe here? Reversible enzyme is a dehydrogenase, and then inorganic phosphate is entering, then I'm forming NADH. This is going to be important because the NADH is being carried into electron transport chain, of course in the mitochondria, and this happens only in the presence of oxygen. We'll discuss this as we go on in our lectures. Now we go to step 7. In step 7, we have conversion of 1,3-diphosphoglycerates to 3-phosphoglycerates. Yeah, so what's the difference? When you look at it very carefully, so easy to pick up. 1,3-di, they with 2 phosphates. When I look at here, how many phosphates they have? Well, just one. So 1,3, please, of course, these are the positions where you have them. So 1,3-diphosphoglycerates to 3-phosphoglycerates. That means there has been a removal of phosphate. But this particular step is a step we call substrate level phosphorylation. What do I mean by substrate level phosphorylation? That means at this very step, the substrate is used to directly phosphorylate ADP to form ATP. It is usually an energy producing process or step. Now I'm producing energy in the form of ATP. But where is the source of ATP? ATP is formed by phosphorylation of ADP. Now what is used to phosphorylate ADP is your substrates. So if you carefully see here, I had 2 phosphates on this compound. But here I have only 1. That means one of them has left. And when it leaves, it's used to form ATP. Let's observe how that step happens. So I move from 1,3-diphosphoglycerates. And I go to, of course it's reversible, and I go to 3-phosphoglycerates. Right here, like I said, ADP is converted to ATP. Why? If you see, I have 2 phosphates here. So I take one of them, the one on position 1, and I add to ADP, and I form ATP. So because I'm forming ATP in this particular step, it is called substrate level phosphorylation. SLP. Now, you could ask yourself, what does that mean? Is this the only place we form ATP? No. For example, NADH here can be carried into electron transport chain. And when I carry him there, he's usually oxidized in the transport chain and then converted. So we will have CO2, we'll have water, but the key thing is that we'll be having energy produced in the form of ATP. But that's not our concern here. My concern here is that when you look at substrate level phosphorylation, I am forming ATP directly from the step. The substrate is losing a phosphate. The phosphate is added to ADP and negates ATP. So energy is produced in this step, and that's step 7. Now, that's also step 7. The enzyme for this step is called phosphoglycerate kinase. Now, usually the name here is given out of respect to this guy, because I feel The case is that it would have been harder to name it from this other end. 1, 3, a lot of names. So rather, the way it's named, since it's a reversible step, you can choose to start from here or here. So if we start from it, it's phosphoglycerate kinase. So that means I am using an ATP, I'm transferring phosphate to him to form this. It is reversible. So that's why it's that way. Okay, now usually this step is usually diverted in some conditions. Yeah, there are conditions when there's excess metabolism and this step can be diverted. And we have 1,3-diphosphoglycerates moving to form 2,3-diphosphoglycerates instead of forming 3 phosphoglycerates. Usually it's a particular shunt. It's a particular shunt, and the essence is not for energy production, please. So we'll mention it later when we talk about the shunt. Now let's go on. In step 8, there is conversion of 3-phosphoglycerates to 2-phosphoglycerates. That is strange. That is strange. If you've watched our former video, if you are yet to watch it, please go back and look at it. You hear what I said, whereby you observe that anytime phosphate is added to a compound, phosphate is usually added to the ends. So either the first carbon or the last. Now, usually, if there's specific, for example, when I use hexokinase, that is a non-specific enzyme. So it will be phosphorylating at carbon 6, that is at the ends. But whenever I'm using someone specific, its target will be carbon 1. So you realize it is either 6 or 1, that's at the ends. Now, why did I have 3 here? It is because it was divided into 2. So it was a 3-carbon compound. So you are either on number 1 or number 3. So that's why I was having 3 all along. But whenever someone moves from normal to abnormal, like instead of staying in number 3, I am now changing the position of the phosphate to number 2. That is a mutation. What is a mutation? Usually in a definition, we say mutation is just the alteration, a permanent alteration. You are changing something from the way it should be. So when you look at this, instead of being normal 1 or 3, you are changing from 3 to 2. That's a mutation. That's why this particular enzyme is called a mutase. So without much ado, okay, please, this particular step required magnesium. Now without much ado, 3-phosphoglycerate is changed. Please, of course, it is reversible to 2-phosphoglycerates. And like I said, the enzyme here is called a phosphoglycerate mutase. And I gave you the idea that mutase is an idea of mutation. So something is changing, there's an alteration from the normal, so it is a mutase. Now you hear this a lot, but just take note of the fact that normally it should either be 1 or 3 in a 3-carbon sugar, or it should be 1 or 6. When I have someone change from the normal 1 or 3 or 1 or 6 to something in the middle, that is called a mutation, and the enzyme is a mutase. So that is for step 8. It is reversible. This is the enzyme. It is just isomerization, and particularly this will be positional isomerism. So now let's go to step 9. Now in step 9, 2-phosphoglycerate is converted to phosphoenol pyruvate. So you realize there's a change from 2-phosphoglycerate to phosphoenol pyruvate. A change from 2-phosphoglycerate to phosphoenol pyruvate. Right here, there's nothing much happening. We are moving from a particular acid to another one, but the alteration in structure is that the phosphates, the energy level of phosphate is raised. So we take it this way. Now, because ideally it is easier to remove phosphate at the ends, 1 or 3. But when I have to remove him from the middle, that is not normal. That is not in normal position. So the energy level is increased. This change in energy level, and it's just an alteration that changes him from 2-phosphoglycerate to phosphoenol pyruvate. And the enzyme is called enolase. The enzyme for this stage is called enolase. And this is an enzyme I have to talk about for a short while. So from 2-phosphoglycerate to phosphoenol pyruvate. So it's a reversible step, and then the enzyme is called enolase. So water is usually added to take him up, and then it requires magnesium. Magnesium is required for this step. Magnesium is required for this step. Now, enolase is very important because this particular enolase can be inhibited by a particular guy we call fluoride ion. Enolase can be inhibited by fluoride ion, and this is a mechanism for targeting of most of the toothpaste we use. Now we understand that in toothpaste there is fluoride ions in toothpaste, and what does the fluoride ion help us do? Now, when you brush, the fluoride ion within the brush will alter the glycolytic pathway of the bacteria. Now you understand bacteria here. They don't know what they do. Their source of energy is glycolysis. Now it cannot kill the cells in your mouth. Of course, glucose is not available yet. So, but when you're done brushing, the fluoride there will inhibit enolase within the bacteria. So when I inhibit this enzyme in the bacteria cannot complete glycolysis. So this particular step will be inhibited, and then the bacteria cannot complete glycolysis. Now, what is the danger of this? The bacteria will die, and of course, that keeps your mouth clean. So understand me. Ideally, we have bacteria in our mouth after our meals. Now, when I brush my teeth, when I take in a toothpaste, the fluoride in the toothpaste is going in there to target the enolase within an enzyme within the bacteria. Now, when I can inhibit that enzyme, that means I can stop glycolysis from occurring in the bacteria. And once that happens, oh my God, this step is inhibited and glycolysis is paused. And the bacteria, since it cannot produce energy, will have to die because he will invest in preparatory, but he will not enjoy the energy in oxidative. And so that's that. So we now go to step 10, which is our last step, and this is the conversion of phosphoenol pyruvates to pyruvates. Now this is the last step in glycolysis. Where I have my PEP converted to pyruvate, and it's step 10. So that means it is actually reversible. It is actually irreversible. So when you see it, it's irreversible. Now right here, this is another level of substrate level phosphorylation. I have substrate level phosphorylation here. That means you observe there was a phosphate here. So phosphoenol pyruvate, there was a phosphate here. The phosphate is removed so that I could have pyruvate. So that's why we are having this to ATP. Do this, of course, this reaction is not directly one step, but we're wrong with this. Now ADP changes to ATP, and it requires magnesium too. But we are told this step also needs potassium. Potassium ion helps to increase the action or magnify or potentiate the action of magnesium. So these are the cofactors. The enzyme here is called pyruvate kinase. So pyruvate is produced, energy is produced here in the form of ATP. And please remember that each of these steps was for 2 persons. So starting from step 6, since I started my oxidative pathway, in step 6, there was production of 2 NADH. Now in step 7, I have my first structural level phosphorylation, whereby 2 ATP are formed. It should be 1, but because they're from 2 persons, so 2 are formed. And then when I get to step 10, another substrate level phosphorylation occurs, whereby 2 ATP are now formed. So what have we learned in summary? In summary, we established that glucose, the end product of digestion of carbohydrates is glucose. But not just glucose, we could have some other monosaccharides like fructose and galactose. We established it in our former videos. Now, we said that these guys are carried from the GI tract to the blood. So they are absorbed to the blood. But which particular blood vessel? The hepatic portal vein. Now, once from there they are carried to the liver. Here in the liver, every other person like galactose and fructose have to be converted to glucose. But once they are converted to glucose, what happens to glucose? Glucose is now carried to the heart, and from the heart to other parts of the body, other cells in the body. Now, on getting to other cells of the body, what happens? The first thing that happens there is called glycolysis. Glycolysis is one of the ways whereby glucose can be used to produce energy. So it's in phase 2 of metabolism. Now, within this thing, I mentioned that Glycolysis has 3 stages. It happens in the cytosol, has 3 stages: preparatory, splitting, and oxidative. Now, in the preparatory stage, this is where energy is being used. So, in summary, we could have steps whereby glucose, my glucose, changes to glucose 6 phosphate. So, of course, you see here, the only thing happening here is that there's an addition of the phosphate, and the source is ATP. Now, we also went ahead to now mention from this glucose 6, we keep changing and changing, but the end product is who? Pyruvate. So now, what should we take note of in the entire glycolytic pathway, which will be of importance to you? Now, step 1, step 3, and step 10 are all irreversible, so they cannot be reversed. So because of this, they are usually tagged as regulatory steps, and their enzymes are called regulatory enzymes. So we have 3 regulatory enzymes: the enzyme of step 1, which is hexokinase; the enzyme of step 3, which is phosphofructokinase 1; and the enzyme of step 10, which is pyruvate kinase. So all the enzymes here that are catalyzing irreversible steps are called regulatory enzyme. Amongst these 3, the rate limiting enzyme is phosphofructokinase 1. And establish what rate limiting enzyme is. It's an enzyme that will catalyze the step called rate limiting step. And usually this step, the case about this step is that it is the most important step, in that once it is overcome, the particular party will go on to completion, because it's usually long, so it takes time. So that is really that about that. Also, what else is important? In step 1 and step 3, ATP is used, whereas in step 7 and step 10, ATP is produced using substrate level phosphorylation, whereas for step 6, 2 NADH are produced, and those NADH are produced are carried into ETC to produce more ATP, but that will happen only in the presence of oxygen. In the absence of oxygen, the NADH are now added, are converted back to NAD plus by just the conversion of pyruvate to lactate. Something we'll talk about in our next video, which is the fate of pyruvate. So that brings us to the end of glycolysis, a process whereby glucose is broken down to give us pyruvate, and then energy is produced. Thank you very much for joining us. See you in our next class.